Now let's turn to Romans chapter 14. This is our study on feasts and fasts and food. Oh my! And we're in the conclusions to basically verse 1. And so let me just jump right into the study. If you missed a previous study, like last week's study, go to my website at tatesaytorah.com. There's two places that you can get to the study. Go to my website at tatesaytorah.com. Click on the link that says Romans 14 Unplugged right from the home screen, and that'll take you to the Romans 14 page, and you can follow the study that way. Or if you're interested in watching the videos, probably the easiest way, again, go to my website, go to my YouTube channel, and exploring the Shema as well as the live internet studies. The Romans 14 is not a separate video. Instead, it's packaged into the longer live internet studies. So if you look at my YouTube channel, those thumbnails that say live internet studies, click on those, and the Romans 14 is hidden right in the middle of that study. But if you just want the audio or the written, then here's where you need to go. So let's look at this. Last week, we left off with this quote from Mark Nanos, who is, as you're looking at your screen right now, he's the author of the book that I've been primarily working from, Mystery of Romans. You can see it right now on your screen, black cover with red writing. And Mark Nanos is challenging the traditional Christian idea that the weak in faith in Romans are actually weak Christians with a propensity for keeping Torah as Christians, whether they be Jewish or Gentile. So that's the traditional Christian perspective. Weak in faith means, according to standard Christian exegesis of this passage, weak in faith means you are a believer in Jesus, but your faith is weak because you are still following after Torah. You're still gravitating towards things Torah. You still prefer to keep Torah-related concepts such as feast days and fast days and food and things like that. Try to keep kosher and things like that. And so basically, the traditional Christian perspective is, as I keep mentioning, is that the weak in faith are Christians whose weakness is directly connected to their belief in Jesus, plus a continued dependency on Torah. And lastly, within that same Christian perspective, it's no secret that these weak Christians, who are the weak in faith, are actually expected to gradually grow in their faith and eventually leave the ceremonial parts of the Torah behind. That's essentially the traditional Christian sentiments of this particular passage. Mark Nanos is giving us the alternate perspective, and his alternate perspective is that the weak are non-hostile yet non-Christian Jews whose weakness, if you want to call it, is directly connected not to Torah, but to their, as of yet, inability to believe in Jesus as Messiah. That's their weakness. Their weakness is a lack of faith in Jesus as Messiah. However, per Mark Nanos' research, their loyalty to Torah as Torah keepers, right? Primarily he's talking about Jews, but this would include Gentiles in Paul's day who would have embraced Judaism as their religion, perhaps as proselytes, or perhaps where they were God-fearers or something like that. But either way, they were investigating and adopting a Jewish lifestyle. So their loyalty to Torah is seen in Paul's day as an expression of their covenant faithfulness to God. Even though they don't have faith in Jesus as the Messiah, they do express a faith in God and a loyalty to Torah. And so what Paul would express in his writings, this is under Nanos' view, is that their eventual faith in Yeshua need not, over time, displace their loyalty to God and faithfulness to his Torah, or faithfulness to God and loyalty to Torah. Do you understand what I'm saying there? So that's the challenge to a study like this. I don't expect people who are following along with this study to jump on board right away after watching one of my videos and saying, wow, hey, that makes sense. I think Ariel's right. Nanos is right. No, just keep investigating on your own. And if you're not convinced, I'm fine with that. Just let me know why you think my particular perspective doesn't work for you. help me understand the blindness of why I would hold this particular viewpoint. So let's pick up my reading in my commentary. We left off last week with this paragraph. Let me just read it real quick so that we can segue into this paragraph tonight, okay? So here's what I said last week. This is kind of the overall perspective, and this is a great way to just explain again that my perspective on Romans may not be accurate. I know people who send me emails and comment in my videos all the time and say, hey, Ariel, you think the weak are unbelieving Jews? That doesn't fit. Okay, tell me why you think it doesn't fit, but at least listen to this paragraph, okay, and tell me what you think about this. This is my own thoughts. In the end, instead of wresting the context of Paul's letter in this important section away from the letter as a whole, then we Christians can instead begin to encounter in today's modern commentaries to this chapter on Romans a perspective that makes a break from the popular yet ill-suited theology that pits Paul against the Judaism that he formerly practiced as a non-Christian Jew. Understand the sentence there. Essentially in today's common Bible study Christian circles, and I pick on Christian studies all the time because Bible studies done by Jews aren't focusing on the Apostle Paul. Hello, duh, right? No one in Rabbinic Judaism and Orthodox Judaism, they don't care about the Apostle Paul, right? He's an apostate. He's a rebel Jew. He's a bad Jew, right? He's a guy that started that new religion called Christianity, which ended up growing to become a competitive religion to Judaism. So it's only within mainstream Christian circles that as we encounter Paul's writings that we see in Paul a law-free gospel, a Paul that left his Judaism behind in favor of a new religion called Christianity, and a Paul that is admonishing followers of Messiah, particularly Gentile ones, that you're no longer under the law. You don't have to worry about the works of the law. None of that can save you. All of that's been done away with. And such and such. So let's keep reading my little quote here. It is in this vein that a better and more balanced view of Paul and his addressees emerges, usually in the form of commentaries put out by those in the emerging Torah Messianic movement, such as myself. So I'm challenging the idea that Paul taught a law-free gospel. And when we as Messianic believers, Jews and Gentiles in Messiah, when we approach the scriptures, if our background includes the assumption that the law has been done away with, it's going to color the way that we read the whole Bible, right? It's going to influence the way we conduct our lives as a result of whatever studies that we're doing. And so, yes, that's why I'm holding these particular types of commentaries. If you read through the book of Romans, and particularly Romans 14, with the idea that the weak in faith are still Christians, but they are Christians whose weakness is betrayed by their continued affiliation with things related to Torah, well, it's only natural that you're going to actually have a somewhat relaxed, or even in worst cases, a pejorative perspective on the ceremonial parts of Torah because they are seen as weakness. They are seen as shadows. They are seen as inferior. And there's certainly going to be things that you're going to want to steer clear of as a Christian. And so it's no wonder that we have that message that's essentially taught from the pulpits. It's not universal, Baruch Hashem, but it is very widespread. And so what do I have to say as a Messianic Jew? Let's continue reading through my own commentary, and you'll hear what I have to say. Here's what I have to say. Jews and Gentiles who embrace a Torah respectful and Torah obedient observant lifestyle all the while retaining their conviction that Yeshua is the exclusive means of salvation and ongoing sanctification in their lives. So who am I talking to? I'm talking to Jews and Gentiles. And if you don't like the term Gentile, we can talk about that. But Jews and non-Jews who embrace Torah, but they still believe in Jesus and they don't leave Jesus behind. These people, they feel that Paul would not have to characterize Torah pursuant people as weak merely due to their preferences and convictions for keeping a Torah-based lifestyle. So that's my first challenge to those of you who agree with the popular Christian idea that the weak in faith are weak Christians and their weakness is tied not just to their, say, time period as a Christian. I understand what that's part of the assumption when we say weak Christians, meaning let's say you have Bob who visits the church last week and then he made a profession. Well, this week is his first week as a true Christian. Last week he was an unbeliever, but he walked the aisle and he read through the Romans Road and the four spiritual laws, and he became a Christian. He became a believer last week. So he's what we call a baby Christian, so that when he attends church this week, he's a baby Christian. He's what we might probably call weak in faith. Therefore, it's natural to understand that his understanding, it's natural for us to assume that his understanding of things related to the Bible is very immature based on the time period that he has spent as a believer. That's not exactly what I'm talking about when I say weak in faith from the traditional Christian perspective. What I think most commentators are trying to infer or imply when they say that the weak in faith are actually weak Christians who are still holding on to Torah, they're actually implying that the weakness is a sign of kind of spiritual weakness due to not tied directly to how long they've been a believer. In other words, Bob the baby Christian can't help but be a weak believer, weak in faith, because of his time, his how long he has been a Christian, right? It's understandable. He's not been exposed to Christian things for very long. But that's not the type of weak Christians that most commentators describe here in Romans chapter 14. Instead, they say that it's actually Christians who've been Christians for quite a long time, maybe several years, a good chunk of their life, and yet they are still practicing Torah-related things. So this easily fits Messianic Jews and sometimes Messianic Gentiles who are practicing Torah-related lifestyles. And so the weakness is seen as a kind of deficiency in their faith based on Torah. So I say, no, we don't have to read Paul that way. Instead, I go on to say the fact that Jewish people living in and among the various first century Christ-believing communities in Rome would have had ample opportunity to hear about Yeshua as the Messiah of their Tanakh and begin to explore his role as their personal Savior. In my opinion, this seems highly plausible from an historic point of view. So if we look at history of the first century at least, you have to remember that we're talking about prior to the destruction of the first century temple, prior to the destruction of what we might call the split between the church and the synagogue, where the church goes off in one direction as their own religion and the synagogue goes off in their own direction as a competitive religion to Christianity. In Paul's day, and when Paul was writing, we didn't have that split yet. Meaning, if you read through the book of Acts, you'll discover that the Gentiles are found congregating quite often in the synagogues with Jewish people, both believing and unbelieving Jews. And the Messianic Jews are also found congregating in the synagogues. Now, we did have church groups that were breaking off and forming on their own home church studies where they would meet in their homes or they would meet in other buildings. But the point I'm trying to make is that something that was natural in the first century that doesn't exist today is that both Messianic Jews and Gentile Christians were still welcome in the public synagogue of the day. But today, no, that doesn't happen. Most synagogues that you jump into, whether they be Orthodox or conservative or Reform, the three mainstreams of Judaism, if you wander in today as a Gentile Christian, you're going to be the minority. If you wander in today as a Messianic Jew, you're going to be the enemy. So that's essentially the world that we live in today. That's modern Christianity and modern Judaism. But in Paul's day, that phenomenon wasn't as widespread yet. So it's I think plausible, like I said, to find Jews and Messianic Jews, Jews, Gentiles, both Messianic and non-Messianic, kind of congregating together and working out their differences together in the first century. And so unbelieving Jews had more of an opportunity to kind of explore the role of who Messiah was, who this Jesus character was. It was closer to the time period of when he had lived, so he was more familiar to them as a historical figure. We didn't have all the years upon years and the years of anti-missionary, anti-Christian bias that had already been kind of poisoning the minds of Judaism over the years. That hadn't really existed yet. We had resistance to the gospel, but it wasn't the same form as the resistance to the gospel they have today. Understand? All right, let's keep reading. Let's pick up our reading right there. I go on to say, that these non-Christian Jews should yet be counted as having genuine faith in the God of Israel. Right? Remember. You have to remember, if you don't do this part of your research, you're doing yourself a disservice when you're studying your Bible, especially your New Testament part. You have to remember that when Paul wrote his letters, Paul was already a part of an existing covenant community of faith that in Paul's day would have been characterized as Israel, national Israel, Judaism, things like that. So when Paul looked out across the broad landscape of religion in his day, essentially Paul saw that Israel and Judaism were representatives of the one true religion that God had sanctioned, and that all other forms of religion as of yet were unsanctioned substitutes or counterfeits or pagan expressions and things like that. So you had, widespread paganism and pantheism and atheism and all manner of competitive worldwide religions if we were to move beyond just the ancient Middle East there. But from Paul's perspective, at least there in Asia Minor and in Israel and things like that, he basically saw the world in kind of two options. There was either worship God, the one true God of Israel, or find yourself at the mercy of all the other gods, meaning the other demon entities and false gods and things like that. So there was only one truth available to Paul, and it was expressed in the Tanakh that he carried, and there was only one God for Paul and only one Messiah, and as of yet, Judaism was expressing that one true belief, that monotheistic belief in God. So non-Christian Jews would gain their understanding of Messiah probably from the Messianic Jews and from the Christians that they would encounter. So that's understandable. So these non-Christian Jews were part of Paul's covenant community of faith, belief in God, faithful to Torah, but not yet convinced that Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah that was promised in the Tanakh. This doesn't mean they're hostile, and it doesn't mean that they have to reject Jesus altogether. It just means that they're deliberating. They're trying to decide. They're in decision mode. So give them a chance, like Paul would give them a chance. So these people, while contemplating Yeshua's role as Messiah, I think that it's all the more reasonable to assume, given the truth, that Gentiles with faith in Yeshua as Messiah are in fact joined to the commonwealth of Israel at the remnant level, and thus are shown also to profess genuine faith in the God of Israel. So these are some of the challenges, as I say in closing this part of my commentary tonight. These are some of the challenges that Paul's contemporary fellow unbelieving Jews would have had to wrestle with. Number one, who is Jesus and what is his importance to me as an unbelieving Jew or as a national Jew? Keep in mind that this phrase unbelieving Jew is probably not a label that they would have been too fond of, because, unbelief in what? Unbelief in whom? I believe in God, but I don't believe in Jesus. So unbelieving in what category, right? This is kind of, we have to be careful when we use this phrase unbeliever. But from Paul's vantage point, he could see both sides of the argument. Even though he was a Messianic Jew, he had sympathy for his unbelieving Jewish counterparts because he realized that they were kind of in a quandary. They wanted to retain their faith in God and loyalty to his Torah, but Paul wanted to challenge them to understand how Jesus fit into the salvation program that this one God and God's Torah described. So we had this covenant community of faith, and the unbelieving Jews would have had to wrestle with this idea of, is Jesus the long-awaited Messiah? Is this an idea that I can factor into my already existing belief in God and loyalty to Torah? Does Jesus fit in there, and does he complete the picture, or does he disrupt the picture? How does Jesus fit in? So that would have been one of the challenges that unbelieving Jews, non-Christian Jews of Paul's day would have had to wrestle with. But another primary theological, socio-religious topic that would have probably, I'm certain, caused a lot of consternation among Paul's contemporaries, right? And I'm closing with this, is how do these Gentiles fit in to our covenant community of faith? These Gentiles are claiming faith in the same God that we have. Many of them are also adopting a Torah-based lifestyle, just like we do. And yet they are not Jewish. They are not part of Israel that we can tell. They are not they have not converted to our religion. Some of them are proselytes, and that's great, right? I'm still speaking as an unbelieving Jew in Paul's day. But what do we do with their claims of co-equal participation within our covenants, the covenants that God made with us, and co-mingling among our communities? And they claim to have an inheritance in the blessings that are spelled out for us as a people group, but they're not part of us. I mean, what do we do? So it's that whole ethnic challenge, that whole nationalistic perspective from the unbelieving Jewish side of the house, the whole what I call the ethnocentric Jewish exclusivism, where the traditional Judaisms of Paul's day were holding fast to a kind of a belief system that was largely tied to a Torah for Jews only, a God for Jews only, a Holy Spirit for Jews only, blessings for Jews only, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that when Gentiles were brought into the picture, the first thing we had to ask as Jews was, what do we do with the Gentiles? And of course, the counter question is asked, well, what's the problem with the Gentiles? And the answer is given. They're Gentiles, right? They're unbelievers. They're pagans. They're non-Jews, right? Those are all kind of synonymous terms in Paul's day for Jews to talk about Gentiles. What do we do with them? And of course, the answer from Paul's perspective is, if they are in Messiah, then they are in the community. Then they are in fellowship with God. They are part of the faithful. They are included in the covenant blessings with God, and they have equal access to Torah, and they have inheritance to eternal life. We receive them. We don't force them to undergo copious amounts of Torah. We don't force them to undergo proselyte conversion. We don't force them to change their ethnicity. What we do is accept them where they're at, and we know that they're going to learn righteous behavior as Gentiles as they go along. They'll leave certain pagan parts. Certain parts will drop off. We're going to mandate that at least the short list of 4 is enforced in our communities. But other than that, don't push them away. Welcome them in as fellow heirs and fellow covenant members, fellow community members in this otherwise larger community of faith. Amen? Amen. We'll stop right there.